Is it coincidence or some kind of fake news? We're talking about correlation. Lesson 4, right now. All right, and that brings us to our steps for the critical analysis of correlation. So using these things, I mean, you can use this all over the place because we're looking at a whole lot of knowledge that is being generated by our interpretation of data coming out of samples of data, large data sets that we are accumulating over time. What are we actually talking about? Well, let's take an example and look at this. So I saw something in an article recently, and I'm paraphrasing. So this was right around the time of our presidential election in 2020. So what did this article say? A second American Civil War will erupt with polarized political parties and the election of a divisive president, just like it happened in 1860. The phrase, a house divided against itself cannot stand, is trending online now. Okay, now that seems sensational. It does. I mean, it evokes emotion. It evokes feelings of patriotism. It evokes feelings of dread. There were certain pieces of fact that were thrown inside of there. So let's take a look at what this means. Does the scenario support reasoning based solely on some other data event occurring in the past? And it did. They were making a case that a civil war is coming. It's inevitable. It's here. And it's just like it happened before, over 150 years ago. That's what they used. That was the only real thing that they were making inside of it, making the case for inside of the article. It's almost like an if-then sort scenario. Yeah, that's how it happened then. That's how it's happening now. Maybe. Does the scenario present reasoning based on the perceived dependence of some other data? Yes, it did. I mean, it was making a determination based upon political parties that are divisive right now. Okay, that's good. They are. It was making the case on a presidential election that's going on right now. Okay, perhaps it is. That's true. I mean, those two things are. So it's kind of there. But the argument that they're making is basing it on those two things. I would have to start to question that. Does the scenario support reasoning based on reliance of some data event always occurring with some other data event? Not so much. Does the scenario omit sources for quoted values? It did. So it was the phrase, a house divided against itself cannot stand. That was inside of the article. You know, and that was something that Lincoln had said. That was Abraham Lincoln. What they left out is, I believe this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. So the rest of that quote spoke directly to the issue at the time. Slavery. Okay, that's what it was actually talking about. That's why we were at each other's throats. I mean, sure. Again, in an earlier lesson, we were talking about and looking at perspectives. There are economic situations there where there were instances and concepts and perspectives on what and how to define freedoms and rights and states' privileges, whatever. You had that, but then slavery was there. You know, it was there. I mean, they're omitting. Does the scenario omit related data events in an attempt to support reasoning for something? It does. Okay? I mean, we were at the time, I mean, what else? What else was going on at the time? There were major stressors between the North and the South. You had raids You understand? You had raids by people. People were dying. They were already fighting leading up to this period. Okay? There were already people staging revolts. I mean, so the nation was really falling apart in many ways in a lead up to that, with significant losses of lives. And then as new states were coming into the Union, there were decisions on whether or not they were going to be slave or free. So even the formation of the country was under distress during that period. Perhaps all of those things led up to the Civil War that occurred here in the United States, making the case that a second Civil War is starting without acknowledging all of those significant things that were going back in a time, and then making the case that, oh, it's going to happen right now. In absence of a lot of those major stressors, could be, that could be manipulative. Manipulative. All right. So those kinds of things, that's the kind of thinking that I'm talking about applying the critical analysis of correlation on, taking a look at those kinds of things. But what happens if you don't even have data to be able to work with? What happens then? I mean, there are things that have happened over time. Okay. There just have. There have been things that have happened over time that we just didn't even know about. All right. I mean, and it was hard to find data on it. So are these alternative facts? Look, man, in many ways, alternative facts are indeed facts. They're just looked at from a different perspective. So is your perspective invalid now? In many ways, that's not necessarily the case, but it's an attack that we use all the time. Well, you obviously aren't thinking correctly. I don't value your opinion. I don't value your way of presenting information. I don't value the fact that you might have a difference of opinion. And then we expect to be able to get along with each other in that kind of an environment. All right, that's what we're talking about. I mean, so there are things you just might not even know. I mean, shoot, in Tulsa, you had a significant racial massacre that went down there, but you had powers that be that suppressed police reports. They took out and wiped clean newspaper articles. So some of the things that you might even said just doesn't even make sense. Yeah, it was talking there were 300 African Americans killed in this place. Oh yeah? Show me. Prove it. Where is it? It's gone. You just don't even know about it. What else? Oh, what were you going to say if you learned some government agency was using mind control techniques with psychedelic drugs to create human weapons? I have to call BS on that, man. No, that actually happened, right? Ultra, MK Ultra was the name of that thing. The CIA was running that stuff. So there are things you might look at it. I see no relation anywhere. I don't see a pattern. These things and these organizations, that stuff doesn't happen. Well, perhaps there are perspectives that exist that you just might not be privy to. All right? Those things occur. Keeping a mind open enough to be able to say, yeah, well, I guess I don't believe it, but I guess it's possible. All kinds of things can occur. Yeah. I mean, because you have to think about it. What else in the past might have happened like that? That, we changed over time to be able to accept. All right. So that begs the question, what do you do if the experts or the people who we trust to do a lot of the thinking for us? I mean, think about it. I mean, you have all kinds of studies that are presented. You have all kinds of guidance that are offered, and we have research to back it up. To be honest with you, I read a lot of books. I do a lot of AI. I do a lot of analysis. But I don't have time to read the latest. I don't have time to read the latest information on plagues or pandemics. I don't have and I certainly don't have the skill set to be able to assess a lot of the stuff that is just kind of basic science inside of climate science. My expertise is not there. I just don't. I have to trust what my peers have to say. But here's where it gets questionable. I mean, because over time, I mean, think about it. I mean, we've progressed now, but I mean, honestly, there was a time when the experts said that the earth was the center of the universe. There was a time when the learned men used to say that humans were plucked up out of the dirt by gods. There was a time when people used to believe, men of science, that blood humors control the moods of humans, people. Yeah, it's different blood humors and different things there. We used to believe, right? Our best scientific minds told us that, let's say, the bubonic plague was spread by humans. Then they said it was spread by rats. Then they said it was spread by fleas. Well, which is it? Which one of those alternative facts is it? I am going to say this. They were all facts because they were all true, depending on how you looked at it. Yes, it was spread in a way. It did migrate across with human contact. Yes, there were rats involved because they were transporting the fleas. All of that rang true. It all was there. So, and many times, you hear you shouldn't eat eggs. This kind of diet is going to work. This one isn't. I mean, so you have experts saying one thing and then they contradict themselves in other ways. Now, maybe let's push that to the side for a second and then go straight with just hard scientists, because that's where I could see that where many people have an issue. So you have these people with a bunch of alphabet letters after their name telling you all kinds of things. I'm John Smith, PhD, CSP, whatever. And I'm telling you that you need to do this. And then you have scientists on the opposite side telling you the complete opposite. Or even worse, next year it completely changes. That's not what it was at all. We've made a new determination. It is this. Look. We have what we have. We do what we do because we have the scientific method. And as long as you kind of accept what that thing is, then you'll be all right. Many of the things that we're talking about and we look at, if you put it inside of that context, it makes sense. So, briefly, I shall go over this thing. What are you actually talking about? You're making an observation. You observe something that's actually happening. After you do that, you identify something that you might be able to ask a question about. I don't quite understand this. You form a hypothesis. Right? I believe this is actually happening. Okay? It's as a result of the observations and questions that I'm now finding. I think this is what is happening. Then you test that. Test this out. Test out the hypothesis. Whatever means you come up with. You come up with your experiments. You keep track of the data so that somebody else can replicate it. That kind of helps. It kind of adds with the truthiness of what you've actually done. And then you analyze it. See what that thing looks like. All right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's what we're looking at. And then once you're done, perhaps you might go back to the top and start observing again. Yeah. It goes on and on. Okay? What happens if something happens here and we see that this hypothesis is wrong 5 cycles through? Well, it might mean that our analysis means that maybe one of our original questions had to change. Maybe it answered a no. Maybe it was yes, but upon further analysis, it actually is a yes only a small percentage of the time. It really is a no. That's what science progress is. People would look at that and say, well, you should make up your mind. Making up your mind means allowing for your mind to be changed as well, especially in this space, because that's how it works. We constantly make new developments, constantly make new discoveries, and then you might have to change how you explore things, how you look at things, how you interpret the world. That's where some people talk about that flip-flops. Well, yeah, that's right. It flip-flops. Probably most times for your own good. You understand? It's your benefit that we're flipping-flopping. But it's a cycle. It goes on and on. Same thing here at Purveyor Tech. That's why we had the 3 algorithms. I mean, you have those things there. I mean, thus far, we've been looking at the SCA. That's for understanding. We will look at, towards a few weeks from now, the accusion. That helps with understanding decisions. All right. And then, of course, after that, we also have the equalage. So there are 3 algorithms, right? You start out by looking at trying to derive understanding, forming questions after that, and evaluating the decisions of that, which informs your actions, where you're looking at those types of things and making analysis afterwards. Hence, you move back up to seeking understanding again. All right. So even this, it's a cycle. It's cyclical. It's something that you do to look at all perspectives, maybe not all, as many as you possibly can, in order to try and understand and make the best decisions possible. That's what we're actually talking about when we're looking at these things. Correlation and the critical analysis of this has a lot to do with those types of things. Making sure that we're able to trust the data that we're actually looking at, making sure we're asking the right questions about the data for the things that we're looking at, and then making the best decisions and judgments that we can after we've done our due diligence. All right. Moving on. We're running into our third activity, where we're going to be looking at examples of correlation to consider. You're going to be applying these steps for critical analysis of correlation against these 4 things. Halley's Comet can be seen once in a lifetime. I mean, that's what we're actually talking about there. You could look up some of that information to see how often it actually comes, so on and so forth. Violence in movies and video games. We played a lot of video games in this household. We watched a lot of movies. Starship Troopers. Loved that movie. Boys all loved that movie. Now, man, I'm not saying all boys. I'm saying the boys that grew up in my household. That was must see or must watch TV here. Video games has contributed to real life violence in society. That argument has been made. Capitalism is good for society because it has prevented war between the major powers. Well, make that argument if you want. Drinking straws are bad for the environment. So apply the critical analysis against that. Look, you can look in lots of different ways at that. It might not be that you're just focusing on Halley's Comet seen once in a lifetime or contributing to real life violence. You could be focused on, did that happen over the past few decades? All right. I mean, that could be what you're looking at. Could it be that capitalism is good for society because it has prevented war? Is that the prevention of war is good for society? I mean, you could evaluate the steps for critical analysis here in lots of different ways. I encourage you to do so. And then after you're done, come back and we shall move forward. All right, and the last thing we're doing this week is one last activity where you're applying the SCA of Correlation against current events, okay? So keep in mind, I mean, think about this. Remember, as you're applying these steps for critical analysis of correlation, there are no right and wrong answers here. We're not telling you how to do or how to think. We're just trying to stress asking questions, all right? So that whatever you do think is within the context of as much information as you can get. So you might be looking at this. I've picked a current event. It has to do with, I don't know, the award ceremony in Hollywood. Maybe that's what you're looking at. But what was the right answer? There is no right answer. There is your answer. All right? There's your answer, and then being able to explain it to somebody else. That's what we're talking about. So you derive your answer, come up with these things, make sure that it looks right, and keep in mind, I mean, you could pick this scenario here and then look at it from the steps for critical analysis for, again, perspective and bias. And now you're looking at correlation. Okay, so you might be looking at scenarios and there might not be a correlative issue there. It might have to do with bias instead. Okay, that's where the steps for critical analysis of bias would come in. That's applicable. Some things, it's just not in the correlation space. All right. So keep that in mind as you're going through these things. You don't always have to apply all types of these steps for every scenario. Some scenarios could have multiple things. They could be perspective-based, almost always, correlation and bias. Or maybe it's just correlation you're focusing on. That's going to do it for this week, lesson 4. All right. I want to thank you for spending time with me, listening to some of these crazy things I'm talking about. Hopefully we're not blindsided and the wool pulled over our eyes with regards to numbers and figures and presentation of facts and figures and so on and stuff. That's what we're trying to focus on this week, and I wish you the best of luck and try to make sure that you stay up with what society throws at you, because it's a wild one out there. Keep in mind that there are to-dos to do inside of the course management system. There's homework, so get that stuff done, and then I will see you next week. As always, Jiffy Tiles.